Good evening. Welcome to the Museum at MFIT's Fashion Culture Series. My name is Tania Melendez Escalante, and I am Senior Curator of Education and Public Programs. Tonight, it is my honor to introduce the taste curators, Abbey Cook and Lish Steiling. They will discuss the exhibition Food and Fashion with co-curators Melissa Marra-Alvarez and Elizabeth Way. The evening will focus on the coincidences between food and fashion and will include tasting dishes inspired by objects in the exhibition, and you've already tasted our first cocktail. I ask you to please silence your devices, and please join me in welcoming Melissa Marra-Alvarez, Elizabeth Way, Abbey Cook, and Lish Steiling. Bless you. Are we good? Uh-oh. Oh.
I think it's me. I'm going to turn it off. We'll share.
Okay.
Should we share as well?
Yeah, we can share as well. We're close.
I'm going to turn it off. It's on. Oh, good. Is that better?
Is that good? Okay, and everybody can hear us? We're good? Uh-oh. Nope. Just kidding.
I think this is why we needed the Prosecco.
Yeah, exactly. Are you good?
Testing.
Yeah. Okay. Here we go. Thank you all for being here. So we are the taste curators. I'm Lish Steiling. This is my wife, Abbey Cook. Together, we make up the taste curators. Our goal as a group is to inspire joy through the connections of food and fashion. So hence us being extremely excited about the exhibition that's at FIT right now, curated by these two fabulous folks, which we highly suggest you all go see at some point, if not this evening. Perfect. Love to hear that. So as I mentioned, I'm Lish Steiling. I'm the culinary side of our duo. I have over 26 years of experience in the food service industry. I am a chef, food stylist, recipe writer, and Emmy and James Beard winning culinary producer. So kind of do a lot of the things. Most recently, my last full-time job was the VP of Culinary Operations and Production for Giada De Laurentiis. And I'm currently working on not only a cookbook series with my lovely wife here, but also a cookbook with our friend Tamron Hall that is meant to be published in September of 2024. So keep an eye out for that.
So my job is a trend forecaster in color and fashion, but I also get to be the taste tester for this one. So I get two jobs. I've been working in fashion and color for over 15 years, and as a trend forecaster, I'm predicting what everybody's wearing about 2 years in advance. And I present to major retailers around the world, from your Targets and Walmarts to Calvin Klein's, etc. I do a lot of work with color. Some of you might know what I dubbed the cult color, millennial pink. I had a huge hand in creating that over 10 years ago. And also the shocking pink, the really bright fuchsia that you've been seeing the past 2 years, and you might be seeing it tonight. So that's one of the things that I do. And so together we've been doing a lot with food and color. And this is the cookbook series that Lish was mentioning. We're calling it Palette. So you're linking flavor palettes to color palettes. And we've developed all recipes to make you think, like, what does a color taste like? So our first book was yellow. We have them out there. And we also just got red yesterday. So you all are the very first people to see this book. And so we are doing 6 books in total over the course of a couple of years, and we hope you collect them all. They're locally printed, locally designed, and we're self-publishing them. And so it's been a really fun, exercise in figuring out what does the color taste like. So you can ask us those questions more on this over there at the end. And so actually, why don't you guys go ahead and introduce yourselves. These are the fabulous curators of the Museum of FIT.
So hello, everybody. Good evening. I'm Melissa Marra-Alvarez. I'm the Curator of Education and Research at the Museum at MFIT. And I just want to say I have both of their cookbooks, the yellow and the red, and they're awesome.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Liz Way. I'm Associate Curator of Costume at the Museum at MFIT, and we are the co-curators of the Food and Fashion Exhibition.
And co-authors.
Yeah, I was going to say.
And co-authors of the book.
And if you haven't seen the exhibit yet, you need to go see it because it is so incredible what these two have put together and created.
So basically, to start our journey this evening, we want you to embrace your childish enthusiasm. So the goal here is to ask yourself, what does a garment taste like? What does something taste like? So we are going to start in the day of food is fashion, the fashion kitchen. Would you two like to tell us a little bit about that area of the exhibition?
Sure. I'll start just by saying that the exhibition Food and Fashion looks at over 200 years of the way food and food culture have influenced fashion and fashion design. And so it's really exciting to do this event this evening because when we were working on the exhibition, a lot of people asked us, like, what is this exhibition going to be about? They had a hard time seeing some of the connections between food and fashion. And so what we explore through themes that we'll see today are all these multi-layered connections. And so I'm going to pass the mic to Liz, who will tell you about our day of food and fashion, which is where we start the exhibition.
So what you see now is the introductory gallery, and I will mention that our galleries are open till 8 p.m. tonight. But we really wanted to think about temporality and how food and fashion kind of create the rhythm and the timings of our day. So in our introductory gallery, our day of food and fashion takes you through 4 sites, and the first one is the kitchen, and this is where we start our day in the morning. So we look at the kitchen as domestic space through food and fashion, and then also some collaborations between fashion makers and food-related makers.
So you guys actually already started your journey, and the first pairing is with this Dolce & Gabbana refrigerator here.
Yeah, it's a collaboration the Italian designers Dolce & Gabbana did with Smeg. I was really excited. I didn't know this was going to be in the exhibition, and I've been wanting to see one of these in person forever. Talk about a very saturated, pattern-heavy refrigerator. Like, this is, the focus point of your kitchen if you have this.
Love it or you hate it.
Yes, exactly. So I was really drawn to the bold colors and the patterns. And even though there's some citrus on there, I saw a lot of florals. And so you can talk about.
So the cocktail that you guys were sipping on as you entered is actually inspired by the kind of bold, fearless, reckless abandon of this refrigerator, right? So there's star anise, there's orange blossom water, which is very polarizing, I know. Hopefully it's balanced. There's a little apple cider vinegar in it for some acid, and because Italians love their gin, a little bit of juniper berry. So there's big, bold flavors. And of course, since you're headed to the refrigerator, you might as well have a little snack. So it's garnished with a little Basque pear and some Gouda cheese. So the Gouda actually goes very nicely with the earthy, warm spices that are in the actual cocktail. So, yeah. Yay! Hopefully you can feel the connection in it. The high fashion restaurant, ladies.
The High Fashion Restaurant is where we end our day of food and fashion, and we were thinking about, in part, the idea of fashion in the restaurant space. So the idea of dressing up to go out to dinner, how the restaurant can become a performative space. We were also thinking about waiters and waiters' uniforms and how they've influenced fashion, which are also pieces in that collection. And we have one piece in this section that is by a slow fashion label called Issoud. It's the designer's Katie Brearley. She's from Rhode Island. And she was thinking about connections between slow food and slow fashion, the community spirit that's involved. And so...
I'm not going to click it over just yet because the dish that's coming is a little interactive. And I really loved, we're looking at the dress on the far right, as mentioned, and I was really drawn to this piece, not only for the silhouette, but obviously the pattern and the color. There's that kind of bright, shocking pink fuchsia color in there with the purple. And the designer was inspired by wine-stained tablecloths via a winemaker, right, in Loire Valley.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, this is an interesting connection between food and fashion. And so I was really intrigued for Lish to come up with a dish, perhaps using the colors, the grapes. I wasn't really sure.
So I'm waiting to see like when you guys all kind of have your plate. But for those of you who do, the idea here is that you have a little cheek of lemon on your plate. That's going to be your paintbrush. So what I encourage you to do is take that cheek of lemon and squeeze it over the purple cauliflower puree. Start slow at first and give it a minute. Let it sit. And you're going to see the evolution and the change happen right in front of you. So not only does the color palette change on the plate, but the flavor palette does as well because you're adding acid. So it brightens the entire dish. The purple cauliflower that you'll have on your plate is to mimic the silkiness of the dress. Of course, the purple obviously is a literal connection, but adding in that pink element from the acid is kind of an unexpected pop. So the grapes are roasted with a little bit of fennel pollen and salt, and then it's all topped with some crushed pistachios just because there's structure in the dress. So there should be texture in the dish, even though the rest of it's silky, right? So you have this like playful moment that happens in your mouth.
Oh, Lish, I just wanted to add, I'm watching everybody squeeze the lemons onto the plate. And what's really interesting is the designer who did this dress she always uses natural dyes. And she's really, she was trained by a really famous dye master. And she's very inspired by the alchemy of natural dyes. And so I think you guys kind of hit on something with this dish and the magic that happens when you squeeze the lemon onto your plate. So I think this pairing is super in sync.
Wonderful. I did. I tried clicking, but it's patience, right?
There we go.
All right.
So you can see, ideally this is happening Ideally this is, yes, happening in front of you as well. But that shocking pink color that happens on the plate, right, changes the color palette and the flavor palette. So it's kind of a fun little playful connection that happens right on the plate in front of you. And the earthiness of the cauliflower with the sweetness of the grapes, it's all, meant to evoke kind of the terroir of a vineyard, right?
So a few weeks ago, Abbey did a program with our children's program where she introduced natural dyes, and we had all of these kids come and experiment and dye with the natural dyes. So I just wanted to point out how chemistry is such a kind of overarching kind of theme in so many aspects of fashion as well as cooking.
You bring up a good point, because actually on everybody's table, in the centerpiece, there's a piece of fabric, and a lot of them are vintage tablecloths that have been naturally dyed. And so some of you that might have a lavender color piece, that's actually dyed by cabbage. And if you add in baking soda, it goes to a turquoise. So one of you has like a turquoise, I don't know. There's that one, I think, yeah. And then there's also lemon juice, and it turns bright pink. And so the table back there has a cabbage dyed tablecloth, but it's been added with lemon juice. So that's why it's now shocking pink. So there's a lot of chemistry going on, and I am not a chemist at all. So don't ask me the ratios of all this, but yes. So a lot of fun things can happen with natural dyes. Yep. Yes?
What's mixed in with the cauliflower puree to make this happen?
So the cauliflower puree is literally just cauliflower and salt and olive oil.
Really?
That's it.
So if I buy a purple cauliflower and I have a squeeze of lemon on top, it's going to bloom pink in front of me?
Once it's cooked.
Once it's cooked?
Yes, yeah. So when you boil, I just simply boil it. Well, the team here was nice enough to do it for me today, but boil it in salt water and then puree it with the olive oil. And once you add acid, it will turn that bright pink.
Thanksgiving is next week.
Yeah.
I'm going to impress your guests.
I know, Thanksgiving.
How much olive oil do you put in for a little bit?
A pretty good amount. Because that's where you get that velvety, fluffy puree versus like sometimes cauliflower can leave you a little grainy and wanting a little something extra. This is silky and soft, and that's from the fat of the olive oil.
Did you ever have butterfly tea? Because that's,
We were just talking about that, yes.
it goes from, what is it, purple to
Blue, yep.
Yeah,
Exactly. And actually, our next book is going to be blue purple. So we're using the butterfly tea flowers, right? Pea flowers, yeah. Yeah.
I keep mixing the words around.
Yeah.
Butterfly and pea.
Yeah. So while you're enjoying that, a feast for the eyes.
So the next section, one section in the main gallery of our exhibition looks at the intersection of food, fashion, and art. And the intersection of fashion and art goes back to as long as human beings have been making art, because food is so central to our survival and our creativity and our identity, our connection with the land. But it's really the 20th century when we start to see fashion designers kind of pick up on this intersection and incorporate it into their designs.
And so in this section, we go through a range of kind of art, of artists or art movements. We look at some of the old masters. We look a lot at surrealism, because the surrealists love to kind of take everyday objects such as food and turn it into something whimsical and fantastical. We look at pop art. And so Abbey and Lish have selected one piece from this section in which they were inspired by for the next dish.
So this is a dish that you're not getting. This is just something that we wanted to show you guys. But this dress is just, to me, so stunning and striking, and immediately you can see the vegetables and the flowers, and it's who's the
This is an Italian artist, Giuseppe Arcimboldo, and on the dress is a portrait of the Emperor Rudolph II. Here he is portrayed as the Roman god of the seasons. Yes. And so Arcimboldo always depicted often depicted his subjects as a composite of fruits, vegetables, and plants.
So this one, for me, I know it's supposed to be all the seasons, but to me it just read so autumnal, and it just like makes you want to like curl up in that dress, right? Like kind of like a sleeping bag. So I went right to autumn, and Japanese turnips happen to mimic the shape of the dress perfectly. So went with Japanese turnips. I glazed them in a little bit of apple cider and brown butter to bring out that nutty fall flavor. And then it's garnished with a little lavender salt and basil, because it's sweet, there's floral elements, there's a little whimsy to it. So lots of layers to this dish, just to kind of tie everything together.
I love what you did here with the photograph too, because you just see that I think you've kind of mimicked the textures in the food and the textile in the background, as we see in the Comme des Garçons dress. It's really beautiful.
And did you mention you did lavender salt?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I'm a sucker for anything floral, so the lavender salt is like an unexpected moment with this, because you don't really see it per se, and it just hits you.
Suddenly you
Yes.
get floral.
Yes. There's a QR code on your menu to sign up for our newsletter, and we put it's a monthly newsletter, and we put a recipe in every month, and so this will be going in our newsletter if you are intrigued to get it and taste it. You have to make it yourself, but but I highly suggest it, and you can just scan the QR code to sign up on the menu.
I think.
So they're going to be clearing your plates shortly, and we'll move on to the next bite. And we can go back into this area.
So as we're waiting for the next bite, I'll take you to back to the high fashion restaurant. As Melissa said, we looked at fashion kind of inspired by the active dining and the dining room, but also on the other side of that coin, fashion inspired by waiters and wait staff. So we have two pieces here, one by Karl Lagerfeld for Chanel on the left, and then one by Franco Moschino for Moschino on the right. So two takes on the waiter's uniform. The Franco Moschino is kind of a play on the idea of a dinner jacket, but then Karl Lagerfeld was really looking at kind of the uniformity of waiters, how that kind of melds in with other types of dining uniforms like the tuxedo. But you can also see in this beautiful jacket this reductive tailoring that Coco Chanel herself was so famous for in the 20s and 30s.
And this was sorry, actually.
No, go ahead. We're waiting for the dish. You're fine.
I think what's interesting here, as we're waiting for the next dish to come out, is looking at these images and thinking about the use of kind of found objects that are coming in. So on the Moschino jacket, we have the utensils, which he uses to kind of mimic the texture or the embroideries that might be on waiter's uniform or even a military uniform. But also on the Chanel piece, we look at the skirt and we see this, like, it looks almost like lace or ruffles from far away, and it's actually layers of folded linens. And so I think these are all some things to keep in mind.
I'll go to the next one because honestly, you guys have the recipe for this next dish in front of you, and something that Lish keeps telling me, and you're completely correct, that it's a great little bite for Thanksgiving. So highly recommend thinking about this for Thanksgiving. But I chose the Chanel piece because I really wanted to look at something that we know is a classic, and I like that this was just black and white, and you don't always think about black and white when it comes to food. So I was curious what Lish was going to do with this one. And I love the structure on top and the classic Chanel tweed jacket that we all know. But then again, like Melissa mentioned, the ruffles at the bottom, and I loved all those layers and that real like kind of strong juxtaposition between structure and flowy. So that was something that I was very intrigued with and curious where Lish was going to take a black and white fashion piece and put that into food.
So true. I mean, funny little antidote while we are waiting for the next bite. Abbey actually designed a textile at one point. She was doing an internship in Paris at a company called Malia, and she designed a textile that later on, like a year and a half later, we actually saw Chanel had chosen her fabric, basically, and made a dress out of it. So I don't know who, I don't know who the designer was at the time, but but that was kind of exciting. So, so this dish.
Lish, I have a question.
Yes, please.
Since so much of our sensory experiences when we eat, when we see color, right? We can think, as you guys were saying earlier, we were thinking of certain tastes, or part of the exercise today is to think about what fashion tastes like. And now we're seeing it through your guys' eyes. So what are some of the challenges when you're, because Abbey intentionally picked a black and white piece, which is working against, I think, some of what you were talking about. So what, maybe when you were thinking of this, what were some of those challenges?
So to me, I actually like the limitation. So once I actually see the garment and like kind of have a clear-cut path that has to be followed, then that's where the inspiration comes for me. Sometimes if somebody's like, well, what do you want to cook? Like, I mean, that's just an open-ended question, right? I mean, that's like the worst thing that somebody could ask you. It's better to say, I have this, this, and this. What would you like to make? You know, like that to me is where creativity really strikes. So once I saw the garment, I feel like that's where you kind of get excited and get inspiration and kind of start searching for things. Like this dish, honestly, this was not my first round of it. This is what we landed on, I think 2 or 3 tastings in. It started out, I wanted to do it on fingerling potatoes. It didn't have the right structure. I wanted the crisp element. So that's where it evolved into a crostini. And yeah, we ended up on what you'll be tasting today.
And you brought, talking about Paris, like I was talking about, oh yeah, my internship in Paris and doing the Chanel fabric, and that's when, you know, we were talking about our trips to Paris, and the initial idea of what you thought of when you thought of a French bistro was the French onion soup. And so that was sort of your starting point.
Exactly, exactly. All right. They coming out? No. Almost. We're almost there. Does anybody actually, I'll throw it back on you guys. Looking at this Chanel, does anybody have something that they're like, oh, that would taste like? Steak frites. There's no wrong answer.
What about tartuffe with a chocolate crust?
Oh, yeah, I like that. I like that.
Ice cream, which I had, by the way, in a wonderful restaurant last night.
Amazing. I love that. The answer was tartufo, in case anybody couldn't hear. Anybody else? Ladies, what about you guys?
I look at this and I think of some kind of layered creamy pastry. Right?
Yeah. A little millefeuille action?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something light and yes, but creamy. That's what comes to mind. I think it's. Or do you have a?
Yeah, no, I definitely like I think the apron recalls that kind of creamy thing. But what really strikes me about like kind of these associations with food and fashion, Karl Lagerfeld was really thinking about kind of Paris as this quintessential city, and the restaurant as like this quintessential space to express kind of what happens in the city. And so much of what we think of classic codes of fashion and food come from Paris, and it's intentionally set up that way. Paris was an export economy from, you know, the 16th century to try and kind of create these codes of luxury. So it's really interesting. On the fashion side, we think of the Chanel jacket, but on the food side, there's so many examples I'm sure you can give that it's a classic French cuisine.
No, that's so true. I mean, even just the steak frites, right? That's like something that you think of class. Boeuf bourguignon, like all the, you know, I immediately, like Abby had mentioned, when I saw this, I was like, French onion soup. Like that was my initial thought, and that's kind of why I ran with it. Because sometimes your first thought's your best thought, right? It's like when you go to a restaurant and you look at the menu and you're like, oh, that sounds so good. You should probably go with that one. Because by the time that you evolve to your third or fourth choice, it's like, oh, no, I should have just ended where I started, right? So what you have, the crostinis hitting your table now. This is, again, a play on French onion soup, basically. It's kind of like a French onion dip using Comté, so France's answer to Gruyere. And then lots of caramelized onions. And the structure of the jacket comes from the crostini. So you get a little crunch, you get the creaminess of the skirt and all of the layers. Even the cheese on top kind of mimics that fluffy nature of the dress. It's finished with a little nigella seed, which is not French, but adds that backbone of, it really reinforces the sweet onion flavor. So that's the, once you take a bite, let's see if you think that it tastes like Chanel.
And this particular piece in the exhibition, which was from Karl Lagerfeld's Fall 2015 ready-to-wear collection, and which we mentioned was set in a brasserie setting, all of the kind of details from the collection were taken from visual elements of the brasserie setting. So he was looking at the tiles, the napkins, the plates that you were seeing, and Lagerfeld himself spent a lot of time in the brasserie earlier in his career. So he was sitting there kind of commingling with other people, which is how the fashion show was set up. The models came down the runway, or the runway kind of was this walkway through the brasserie, and then they sat down and they mingled and they sipped drinks and ate food just like you guys are doing today.
I want to be part of that fashion show. Nigella seeds? They're like a kind of like an oniony seed. They're actually from the nigella plant. So if you grow nigella in your garden, they're actually harvested from that. But they have like almost a sweet onion. I mean, they have multiple names too. One that I could not pronounce if I tried.
But can you buy a bottle? You
can, yes. We got these at Calustian's. So on 28th. Right? Am I right on that, ladies and gentlemen? Yeah, so Calustian's has them. Penzies out of Wisconsin also sells them. So they're pretty readily available now. And they're nice. They're actually really good in scrambled eggs. So when you melt your butter, add a little nigella seed and then the egg. Woo! Yes.
Abby,
Yeah.
you designed also part of the presentation of this. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So looking at the table decor in the center, I mentioned the tablecloths that were all naturally dyed, but there's also different plates in there that I decoupaged with different food and fashion elements. So throughout the evening, feel free to look at them and see what I found. And I was kind of getting inspired by surrealism, especially Elsa Schiaparelli from the fashion world, and then Salvador Dali. But he also has cookbooks out, so I was intrigued. We have his cookbooks. Highly recommend them. I don't know if the recipes look a little complicated to me, but visually it's a stunning. There's 2 stunning books, and so I was getting a lot of inspiration from them and just having fun finding modern and vintage food and fashion pieces. So that's been all decoupaged, and there's clicker. And there's also squash and grapes on there as well that are just different produce that you're going to see throughout the evening. And one other thing that we'll tell you about later. And also on your menu card, you're going to notice that there's a color palette on the left, and you can see it's kind of taking you through the journey of one of the colors of an ingredient in each dish. So like at the top, there's the soft orange that was meant for the orange blossom water. What's the next color? I don't remember. Oh, the lavender color. That kind of is the grapes. And then you'll see the lemon juice in quotes. Oh, thank you. Because obviously the lemon changed to the hot pink. And then you're going to just keep going down. So the black was for the Chanel piece, and now we are on to the Comté cheese, the soft yellow in there. So something to just think about, even when you're just eating at home, or like, what are the colors of my palette? Whether it's a literal color or one kind of in your head that you're tasting. So just something to think about.
How does everybody like the crostini?
Well, you have the recipe card, so you can try at home. So we'll move on to another little interlude while you guys eat, and move on to a next. I don't want to touch it just in case. There we go. Yeah, so then we head still into the day as food is fashion and going to the market. So feel free.
I got it. So this was also from the introductory gallery of the exhibition. It was a stop at what we called the farmer's market, because we had a lot of pieces in the exhibition that were dresses or these really awesome fashion accessories that featured produce of some sort, whether it was fruit or it was vegetables. Some were quite literal. So some, for example, there's like a Bezben corn hat that literally has these embroidered ears of corn. Some were more abstract, like there's a 1960s kind of bubble hat that has all of these ruffled pieces of fabric in like greens and yellows that when Liz and I looked at it, like from the very beginning, we kept calling it the salad hat because it reminded us of a head of lettuce. But this was a way of looking, in a sense, at the idea of how food can sometimes be a trend within fashion. So for example, with the corn hat in the 1940s, there was a huge vogue for like 2 years for hats that featured corn motifs on them. And then in the 60s, that trend came back again. So we were looking a little bit at trend. We were also just looking at the way in which vegetables and produce can serve as aesthetic inspiration. Sometimes designers are inspired by the shapes of the fruits or the vegetables and use that in their designs. Other times it's literal imagery. Or in the case of the lettuce hat, they were inspired by the textures and the colors. So this is what we explore within this section.
I love this section. I think there's something just super fun and playful and casual about it at the same time. And we all go to the market every day. Well, maybe not every day, but it'd be great. I mean, living in New York, we often do, right? But so I picked out the Levi's T-shirt, partially because I wanted to kind of take a different path with the more formal dresses that we had seen and do something a bit more casual and playful. Plus, Lish loves T-shirts, and so it made me think of her and the carrot. She's got carrot tattoos, so I was like, she's got carrot and radish tattoos. And so I wanted to see sort of this just completely different angle of what we've been having so far and what you've seen. So going in the more casual approach.
Yes. So this immediately made me think of a fried and smashed carrot salad. So these carrots are steamed and then dusted with rice flour and fried. So that they're a little crispy, there's a lot of sweetness to it, all that comes out, and then it's dusted with smoky paprika and a little bit of cumin. And then I think that the shirt itself, which by the way I would wear right now, is so playful, but there's also a cooling element to it. So a little bit of cilantro crema, some avocado, and of course to play up on the playfulness, you need a little crunch. So a bright note of citrus from toasted coriander seeds. So every once in a while you bite into that crunch and it's like, ooh, there's something special. What was that? That's what I get from the T-shirt, I don't know. Maybe I'm off off my rocker.
No, she's 100% correct. And you developed this recipe for
The kitchen.
On the kitchen. So if you go to the kitchen's website, you can actually get this recipe as well. But I was happy to see a salad, and it was kind of where I thought she might go, but I wasn't sure. The smashed carrot threw me in the best way possible. So that was a kind of a fun little fashion interlude, a more casual take.
Just a little background about this piece in the exhibition. This is actually a special line that Levi's did in the 1970s. I think they launched it in like 1972, 1973. And it was called their Fresh Produce line. And it was a line where they would introduce clothes onto the market for 180 days, and then they would take them off the market. So you could only purchase these pieces in fresh produce for 180 days. And so if you bought pieces from this line, if you bought jeans, because they produced a lot of jeans, and you, in place on the back pocket where you would normally have your red Levi's tab, you would have an orange tab with a little carrot on it. And so these are actually really highly collectible denim pieces from Levi's today. But Levi's was actually inspired by the organic produce movement of the 60s and the 70s. And so I think what's really interesting here also is that Lish, you kind of picked up on these bright, crisp colors. And I think that was, at the time, a lot of what people were talking about were the big differences between industrial produce and organic produce. That when we were researching for the book, we would come across people talking in newspapers who were into the organic produce movement, and they would say, oh, the industrial stuff is so drab looking, and it's so uncrisp, bland, and it doesn't come in different varieties. And so Levi's was picking up on this and using kind of the idea of organic produce or fresh produce as a metaphor for fashion.
I think it's so fascinating, and I love that. Wasn't there did they do some kind of newsletter or did I read something about that?
Well, they would have a newsletter internally where they would send it out to other people who are working within the industry or the corporation, and they would, say, okay, this line is coming out. And in fact, I think 2 years ago, they re-released their fresh produce line. But today, these pieces, there's a lot of denim collectors out there who are obsessed with collecting different types of denim. So these fresh produce pieces are kind of prime collectors pieces. So when this one belongs to the Levi's archive. So it's going back to them,
not to Lish Steiling. So for the next course that's going to be coming out, we eat what we are, which is all about heritage, right?
So this is the largest section in the exhibition, and we looked at the ways in which designers use food as a shorthand for their cultural heritage. And so we looked at designers all over the world, Italian designers, Mexican designers, designers of the African diaspora, Americana, and Asian American and Asian designers, and they all have these kind of Issey made a little sushi box, or there'll be images of corn or jollof rice could be a theme for an exhibition. So the way that fashion expresses culture and your cultural identity had such a close analogous to food, and we saw designers picking up on that all over the world.
So the designer that we picked out of this section is Carla Fernandez from Mexico. And Lish and I are both huge fans of her work, and you guys have a great relationship with her. And I think the first time I went to one of her stores in Mexico, I was really intrigued by these bracelets. And this is where correct me if I'm saying it wrong, but the molinho, is that how, molinho?
Molinho.
So what's on the table, feel free to pick it up and look at it, but these bracelets are inspired by that molinho, which is used to make hot chocolate, essentially, right, in Mexico.
Yeah, it's a way you would put, it's essentially like a whisk, and you would put the whisk into your hot cocoa, your hot chocolate, and you would move it like that. And it's a way of kind of making sure that you mix the cocoa and the water or milk together equally, I should say.
So so her bracelets, Lish is going to town playing with that. I love just that her bracelets were inspired by this piece, and so just because we also are huge fans of Mexico and the designer, that's why we wanted to go in this route.
So, of course, thinking of the hot chocolate, I immediately went to mole. We recently took a trip to Oaxaca last year and tasted all the different colors of mole, which is amazing, by the way. So instead of making a traditional mole, which takes a very long time and is very labor intensive, we made a rub with some of the ingredients that you would typically find in a mole. So cocoa powder, cumin, coriander, lots of different chilies, some cinnamon, some cloves, warming spices. And then, ironically, I was actually just going to do this on pumpkin. And this one over here was like, oh, doesn't delicata squash actually mimic the shape of the bracelet? I was like, why, yes, it does. So delicata squash it was. What you have on the bottom, if you can drag the squash through the sauce, it's a whipped tahini. So it has a little bit of lemon and honey in it as well, which would be to mimic the mole again. And on top, it's just finished with a little toasted quinoa. As you know, quinoa is a seed, so it doesn't necessarily have to be cooked. In this aspect, it tastes like toasted sesame. So it brings out this almost like peanut richness to the seed, and that, again, is typical in a mole. So it's just a different layer effect of what would be a classic dish.
Do you have anything else to add?
Just a little bit extra about the bracelets. Carla Fernandez is a designer from Mexico City who's known for working with indigenous artisans throughout Mexico. And so she pairs with the artisans who create the molinillos, and they're made of wood, and they're literally hand carved. And so it really is like an artisan craft that goes into making them. And if you look at the molinillo on your table and you hold it up, you can kind of see the layers of the carvings that go into them. And the bracelets are intended to be worn in a very similar way. You're intended to kind of stack them on your arm and pair the different shapes, thick and thin, and wear them. So the aesthetic really carries over. Of course, Carla's bracelets come in different colors, but I think you can kind of really see where, I just think the aesthetic connections are super strong. And I love, love, love that you made it out of this squash. So we have these rings, and they lay in the same way. I can see it from here. We almost see very similar the texture it mimics is amazing.
I did something right with the food.
Excellent.
Thank you.
And one of the things I'll point out is this idea of artisanship. You're talking about the mole, and you tasted all of these different kinds, and these are recipes that evolve over generations and so specific to the area. And Carla Fernandez works with so many artisans who carve wood, but also weave fabrics and dye fabrics, and there's so much wonderful artisanship across food and fashion in Mexico, and that's just one example of kind of across the world all these beautiful kind of heritages that are captured in both fashion and food.
And we see this idea of tradition and craft evolving, right? Because here is this utensil that's been used for hundreds of years, and now we have a fashion bracelet. So we see the way this craft and tradition gets adapted to a new setting and a new purpose and a new use.
We can go start thinking about the sweets world. While you're eating, we'll have another little interlude, and this is your sugar, spice, and everything nice section.
So over the course of doing this research, Melissa and I dug into so much food scholarship. And, we're fashion scholars, and we know that fashion scholarship is such a rich, deep, wide kind of area that's still growing. And food scholarship is really the same. And there's all these amazing writers who talk about kind of the role of sugar in so many different capacities, economically, how it's connected to the slave trade. But in Victorian times, there was a real kind of connection between femininity and sweetness and sugar. And almost this belief that women kind of were insatiable in their desire for sugar, and it was connected very much to this insatiable desire to consume fashion as well. And so, not the most flattering kind of image, very infantilizing. We think about women, which is very kind of apropos of the Victorian age. But we were really intrigued by this idea of the role of sugar and sweets and how it really shows up aesthetically in fashion so often.
There's also kind of like a dual aspect to this section of the exhibition, because while we're looking at sweets as they relate to ideas of femininity within both food and fashion, food and sweets in particular are also really strongly linked to ideals of nostalgia, right? And many of us often think of, or we can associate sweets from our childhood with memories of being young, of birthday parties, of desserts at special dinners, and so they bring us back to this very kind of happy, calm place. And while we were working on the book for this exhibition, there was this research that was done. We all kind of know our senses work together, right? They all trigger one another. And so there are ideas about sight and taste that link directly to pleasure centers in our brain. And so when designers take imagery such as desserts or candy or ice cream, it's kind of a literal manipulation of our brains to trigger us into thinking about happiness or pleasant ideas and pleasant themes. And I think whether designers realize this or not, that's kind of a manipulation that's going on when we look at dessert printed fashion accessories or, garments that are printed with donuts. We have some pieces in the exhibition by Judith Lieber that are like these little ice cream purses, these little donuts, these little cupcakes. And so there is kind of, again, this these mental connections that are being made, whether we realize it or not.
So from this section then, we chose these little trio vignette of the pumps and the two hats from Balenciaga and Bergdorf Goodman, and then Nancy Haggerty, is that how you say it? And I just love that the hats especially, but the pumps as well. They almost look like little pastries in a way, and like somebody's decorated a cake, if you will. And so I also was leaning towards the soft pink and the roses. And again, remember, this is my third time telling you now that I really like flowers and to eat. And so this is something that you developed.
Yeah. So to go with this trio, I went with a rose panna cotta. So the panna cotta itself actually mimics the shape of the hats, and I kind of love that. Also speaking to the femininity aspect, which, the rose flavor, clearly also very feminine, but the silky sexiness of a panna cotta, when you get that perfect, it jiggles, and your spoon goes through it like butter. Oh, that's a perfect panna cotta.
Your favorite dessert?
Oh yeah, anything custardy. But then to top it with a few macerated berries that just have a little bit of lemon zest to brighten everything. It's kind of like, the accessory or the perfect end of the evening. So I thought that the pairing was quite delightful for the hats especially.
And while we're tantalizing you with this really good dish, you're not getting it, but it is in our red book, the recipe. There you go. Is there anything else you'd like to add for this one before we go to the next one? Okay, we move on to the next one.
Yeah, we're good.
So you will get a little something sweet, we promise.
Wrapping things up.
Yes. So we move into this last section of consuming bodies.
So one of the first connections people make between the topics of food and fashion is this idea of the idealized fashionable body. And people always say that food and fashion don't really go together. And that was something that was really established over the 20th century when this idea of thinness became so important to fashion. It was really propagated by the fashion media and fashion industry. So we think about that in the exhibition through this section in different ways that designers have kind of perpetuated these ideas, and then also how current designers are pushing back against them. So, for example, we have a piece by Chromat, which is a body positive brand, and they had a collection in 2014 where they sent their models walking down the runway eating hot Cheetos, like that. The hot Cheetos aesthetic influenced the design of the clothes. And so we do see all these different ideas. But another part of this section really looked at the conflation of the body with food. And so the piece we're going to talk about in a second definitely is an example of that. But when you dress a body up as food, you think about sensuality, you think about desire, you think about kind of consuming that body. And we see this a lot with women, but also we had examples of how men have been kind of turned into consumables by fashion designers.
I will say, too, working in the fashion industry, I always found it interesting going out to dine with Lish, or just the restaurant industry really takes care of each other, and they're always giving each other food and drinks and that kind of thing. And I was like, well, this is a really cool industry. Why doesn't my industry do more of this? I think it's starting to change now, and I think that's also why we've been trying to merge food and fashion together more and more, to just have kind of both sides come together. So while we wait for the last piece, see, I'm talking in fashion, the last bite, this was the dress that just immediately caught my eye for so many reasons, but I love the literal take of wrapping your body up in a candy bar, and in this sense you have a Hershey bar, and I just thought it was I'm actually not a milk chocolate fan at all, and it's not your first choice either. But something about this dress, I want a Hershey bar.
You don't look at this dress and go, I want a piece piece of 85% Valrhona chocolate, you know? It's like, no, you want that nostalgic element, you know? Oh, no.
And,
Just-
and, oh, and that's something that Jeremy Scott does trigger, that does rely on a lot in his designs. And so he did this. This was his first collection when he designed for the House of Moschino. But he was kind of intentionally triggering these ideas of nostalgia and being young, because aside from Hershey's, which I think everyone kind of smiles when we think about Hershey's. As a kid, I went to Hershey, Pennsylvania all the time in the summer. And so I even associate it with happy memories. But, you know, he also had other candies, but also imagery from McDonald's in this collection. And so it was to trigger these symbols of Americana that everybody kind of associates, or that associates with Americana, but also these ideas of childhood nostalgia and going back to those sweet spots.
It's kind of how we started out, saying be open to the childish enthusiasm throughout this journey, right? We're going to close on that childish enthusiasm and that nostalgia. I think, you know, not everybody can afford a Moschino, but quite a few of us can afford a Hershey bar, so we thought it was a great way to wrap up the meal.
I also just like thinking about the material, and you've got the foil and the wrapper, and just kind of, you know, even the sound. I'm like listening to all you guys open it, and there's that sound element to it that, you know, you're not gonna, I guess, get wearing this dress, but there's just something about that material and that shine of the foil that I love.
No, but when I see this dress, I think of that sound. I really do.
Is it silk?
I don't think so. I don't think the dress is silk. I think it's a synthetic, and it's actually lined with a shiny silver lining to mimic the inside of the candy bar. But I can't imagine that that's very comfortable to wear, to have this shiny, sticky synthetic against your skin. But Jeremy Scott definitely went full inspiration for the candy bar. So when you open it up, it's silver.
And this is one of, I think a lot of the visitors, this is one of people's favorite dresses when they visit the exhibition. Even our director, Valerie Steele, she wrote the foreword for our book, and when we asked her what image she wanted to open her foreword, she was like, the Hershey bar dress. So yes, you know, it triggers something sweet in all of us.
And just even the details of the barcode on here, like there's just, he really just thought of all the details and just literally did a Hershey bar wrapper, which I think is so interesting.
So as we've gone through all of these journeys and through all of the aspects of the museum, I think the big takeaway is we all eat every day. We all get dressed in the morning. You know, I think the connections between all of us and between food and fashion are greater than a lot of us really acknowledge, because we just haven't opened our eyes to it yet. So, you know, kind of go around and try to see things with a little different light, and find the connections that you can find. You know, there's a lot out there that we miss in day-to-day life, but if we slow down a little bit, I bet you we can find quite a few.
Well, that concludes your tasting for the evening, so thank you all very, very much.
There's an opportunity now to ask some questions, if anybody has, for Abbey and Lish. I think we have one coming up.
The question is, can you describe more about your process of collaboration?
Oh, that's a great question.
Who asked that question? It's a great question. Oh, our dear friend Peter. Well, the process of our collaboration, well, I think for this one, the disco ball comes down.
The evening's only beginning.
Yeah. For this experience, you know, for me, I'm just such a visual person, and so I always, color is, as mentioned, is such a strong thing in my life, but also pattern, and I am constantly seeing this world through color and patterns. Even, I actually always like looking down at audiences, because I already am like getting color information from what everybody's wearing, and there's some purples, and there's some reds, and I find that really interesting. There's a color palette that already forms. So I'm constantly seeing the world in color and patterns, and I talk to Lish about this a lot, and I think that started to influence your work with how you deal with food.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of how we discovered the crossovers. I mean, we've been seeing it between our two industries for a very long time now. You know, even down to, as a chef, you use salt everywhere, right? That's the thread that ties a dish together, and a thread is literally what holds a garment together. You know, there's so many crossovers that we've always kind of appreciated it and acknowledged. And so we've been able to find inspiration in the way that both of us see different things. You know, even an experience at a restaurant is different for Abbey now that we've started dining out together. And the way that I shop is different for me. Like, I mean, going on a research trip with her, it used to be that, like, I would touch a garment and I would try to guess what it was made out of because, you know, that's what she had to do for her job. So you get pretty good at seeing things differently when you walk through life together.
That's a fact. But yeah, even just like the literal things, like, you know, we think of recipes and then sewing patterns. You know, there's all these, like, a knife and scissors. You know, there's all these, like, sort of literal ways of looking at the parallels. And that's where we started our process. And then it's just kind of expanded from there.
Yeah.
This summer, there was this major movie out, the Barbie movie, and I just think it's so amazing. I watched tons of women walking to the Barbie movie wearing, quote, Barbie pink.
Yep.
So when's your pink cookbook?
Well, there is pink in our red book. We've just been calling it the red book because it just is easier to quickly say, but there is pink in there as well. Yes, yes. There's a shocking pink dessert, a cocktail, is it?
There's dragon fruit powder. So
Yes, there's definitely moments of pink throughout.
So we have another question. Who has been your biggest inspiration when it comes to food and fashion?
Well, I know your answer for fashion, but
Well, I've been a fan of Elsa Schiaparelli forever, and I have been following this brand. It was dormant for, was it 60 years, I think, or 40 to 60 years? You know, it was Chanel's rival, and I don't know, I just thought what she did was just so outside the box, and so I knew that this brand was going to come back, and now Daniel Roseberry is heading it up, and you've seen his work everywhere. You know, Lady Gaga wore her or his design for the inauguration. Lots of celebrities are wearing it, so that's been a huge inspiration for me.
for me, I would say, I mean, from the age of 13, my grandmother, like, encouraged me to cook. That's kind of, you know, a lot of chef stories is your grandmother. But I was also lucky enough after I graduated from culinary school and moved back to Wisconsin, I worked with a woman chef, who really taught me about the manager that I want to be, taught me more about, like, pushing myself and being fearless, and I think that we pushed each other to do that as well. And to this day, she is one of my greatest mentors. She is the biggest cheerleader, and I stay in touch with her, and I am just grateful every day that I had those 5 years of working with her side by side every night for 12, 14 hours. You know, it was just a great learning experience, especially right after culinary school.
I mean, you're my favorite chef.
It's funny that you say that chef stories always start with a grandmother, because so many fashion designers start with a grandmother and their mother as well. So one final question. Where is a restaurant, or what restaurant that you feel reflects the food and fashion connection?
In Manhattan. Okay. Well, there's a couple of restaurants. You know, there's obviously not all of these are easy to get into, but like Ralph Lauren's Polo Bar. You know, you've got Ralph Lauren, the fashion designer, and his restaurant. Angie Marr. What restaurant?
Libby. Libby.
Yeah. I mean, there's some other ones that you guys, I thought, talked about.
Well, we talked a lot about Angie Marr. In fact, we had Angie Marr talk at our symposium last week, and she was talking about the connections that she uses for the inspiration she takes from fashion, not only for the dishes that she prepares, but also in the ambiance of her restaurant.
I was going to say Bodhi. They don't have their own restaurant, but they've designed the uniforms. And of course, I'm blanking on the restaurant. It's right around the corner from them. It's a Chinese restaurant. It'll come back to me. But that's another, like, it's not their restaurant, but I like that they've been designing. We've been seeing more and more fashion designers design uniforms for restaurants.
Yeah.
There's another one on the top of my head, but tip of my tongue.
There's just so many fashion branded restaurants today.
Yes. It's definitely something that's like trending more. Oh yeah, Gucci. It's not here, but but it's the visual of the restaurant, because it's.
No, just the chef is Massimo Bottura, and he, like, the way that he kind of brings the brand into the food and vice versa, I think is just a pretty smart and ingenious concept. And really, like, it does really cross over when you're there having the experience, I think. So the uniforms, the ambiance, everything just is luxurious, you know?
There's room for growth. Perhaps the taste curators will do something someday. Mark it here right now.
So I want to thank everyone for coming. Please give a round of applause for our amazing staff. And I'd like to remind you that our bookstore is selling books, including the Taste Curators books, as you head towards the exit. And thank you for joining us tonight.
Yes, thank you guys. A huge thanks to the museum at FIT and these curators and Tanya and everything you guys have done. And Jay in the kitchen and his team, thank you guys so much.
Thank you, ladies. Great exhibition.